In 1965, a stadium unlike any seen before was built, costing $31.6 million and being named the Astrodome, an all-purpose climate control facility with luxurious designs inspired by Rome. The dome was like nothing seen before, being dubbed the 8th wonder of the world. So let's look at how that came to be and where it's at now.
Totally sports-esque. Majorly.
The story of the Astrodome really begins with Roy Hoffhines, an entrepreneur and former mayor of Houston. Its inspiration came from the Colosseum in Rome. During his visit, he learned that ancient Romans had used massive coverings to shade spectators from the sun, and he thought, why not create a fully enclosed stadium capable of such advanced technology? But his concept was ambitious to say the least. A massive column-free dome had never been attempted before, and he had to assemble a dream team of architects, engineers, and contractors. And interestingly, Hoffhein's original vision wasn't for a stadium at all. It was for an indoor shopping mall featuring a dome. Collaborating with futurist Buckminster Fuller, Hoffhein's explored the possibility of constructing such a structure. Fuller convinced him that a dome could cover any space as long as money was not an issue. But those ideas shifted to a stadium after a competitor project took over, with the proposals being submitted around the same time proposals were being made for Houston to have their own MLB team. And he wasn't the first to consider the idea of a dome baseball stadium, as Walter O'Malley also consulted with Fuller about a dome for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But those plans are scrapped, which in part led to their move to Los Angeles. And it wasn't just about baseball for Hoffhines. He wanted to create a luxurious entertainment empire that showcased the Rome with the United States, Houston. And Houston would get an MLB team in 1962, known as the Colt 45s, and they played in Colt Stadium. And the conditions were far from great. The rain, swarms of mosquitoes, and sweltering heat caused fatigue and heat strokes. Sandy Koufax joked that Houston Bugs were twin-engine jobs. The National League even adjusted schedules so more night games could be played. So if baseball were to thrive in Houston, a new type of venue was needed. Hoffhines collaborated with William Kirkland to prepare the initial case for a new stadium, and with approval from Texas legislator and insider backing, a referendum was made for the original plans for the mall, which passed 3-1, with Hoffhines convincing power brokers to switch plans to a completely different project. A $35,000 scale model was made with the help of a carpenter, and on January 3, 1962, on the 254 acres resold to Harris County for the site, groundbreaking for the Astrodome began with 7 dignitaries firing wax bullets from Colt 45 pistols into the ground. And after engineering calculations, lawsuits, controversies over the site, need for additional funding, and construction delays that slowed down the entire process, the dome was ready. What the dome was known as for a while was the Harris County Dome Stadium, but few used that name, and Hoffhines told angry politicians that he couldn't sell the name as he prepared to change the name of the dome. And with Metro Houston emerging as the hub for the nation's first space program, there were debates on if the stadium should be called the Stardome or the Astrodome, and after being told to just pick one, Hoffhines picked the Astrodome, and the name of the team would go along with it. Hoffhines never really liked the Colt 45 name, wanting the name to reflect the team's future more than its past, and after Colt Industries pushed to receive royalties for Colt 45 merchandise, the decision was pretty easy, and word of this new Astrodome spread quick. Main word spread the features that were unheard of for a stadium. Padded theater-style seating, luxury skyboxes, themed restaurants, a barbershop, a bowling alley, a weather station, and a 7th-floor opulent apartment set up adjacent to the right field bleachers for Roy Hoffhines. Most notably, there was the scoreboard. Of the $31.2 million spent on the stadium, $2 million of it went to the scoreboard that was 474 feet wide and weighed over 300 tons, and was encompassed with more than 50,000 light bulbs and 1,200 miles of wiring in order to become operational. The home run scoreboard, as it would be called, was programmed to celebrate home runs, lead cheers, and of course, show advertisements. It put every scoreboard in its time to shame, and was met with great enthusiasm. And before the dome's opening night, the actual first pitch was thrown by Satchel Paige, who was invited to the dome in February to test what effect breaking balls may have in an enclosed, air-conditioned environment. And Paige concluded that it was a pitcher's paradise, as he felt the lack of wind allowed for pitchers to maneuver their pitches easier. And he would be right about that. To go along with the deep outfields, as over time, many no-hitters would be thrown, and the Astrodome was among the toughest to hit home run in. And a little over 2 months after Paige made his groundbreaking discovery, the first public event was held at the Astrodome, when the newly named Astros took on the Yankees in an exhibition game. And this would be about as much hype as you could get for an exhibition game. Present at the game was President Lyndon B. Johnson with his wife, who sat in Hoffhines' private box in right field while eating chicken and ice cream. Texas Governor John Connally was present, and he threw out the first pitch. While 21 NASA astronauts were among the 47,879 in attendance, who watched Mickey Mantle record the first hit in the dome's history. Then in the 6th, he recorded the first home run. But the Astros go on to win the game in extra innings. Though Atlanta was opening a brand new ballpark, it didn't get near the coverage of the opening of the Astrodome, as it was on the front pages across the nation, such as the New York Times, which provided a panoramic image of the stadium that you could see once you accepted cookies. And the fanfare continued for the rest of the exhibition series, and for the real opening night on April 12th, over 48,000 were there in attendance, including 24 of the 28 NASA astronauts who would receive lifetime passes. But they didn't see an Astros win, as they would lose 2-0, as Chris Short shut them out with 12 strikeouts. And that inaugural season would be a time to be experimental, in the most experimental stadium ever seen. One of those experiments took place that month in a game against the Mets. Mets announcer Lindsey Nelson gave live commentary while suspended from a gondola above the field. Using a walkie-talkie for communication, he stopped taking score when he realized that if he dropped the pen, it would turn into a missile. They would never do that again, but it was publicized and would lead to future use of overhead cameras. And another aspect experimented with was the playing field. One of the biggest effects amongst many that the Astrodome had was ushering the use of artificial turf. They initially planned to maintain a surface with natural grass using a special strain of grass blends called Tifway 419 Bermuda that was engineered for indoor growth in low light settings. With the dome's clear loose heat panels, it became hard to track fly balls, requiring the roof surfaces to be painted white. This allowed for fly balls to be caught, but it blocked sunlight and prevented indoor plant growth. As the Astros finished that season 65-97 while playing on dead grass and painted dirt. And of course, they had to resolve that problem. And to do that, they worked with scientists to produce an artificial grass-like surface. This product was used in some urban environments for play areas, and after observing a field that was used for school sporting events, Hall-Finds moved forward with the installation, marking the first time synthetic turf was used in pro sports, with the product later being rebranded to AstroTurf. Pretty obvious why. And as the surface gained publicity, it began being used across sports, with numerous stadiums using the turf, with the low maintenance costs being the biggest plus. It was officially installed in its entirety on July 19th, with players claiming that it had no apparent effect, although it was quite evident that the ball moved different on the turf, as many purists hated the turf, especially as it grew to other stadiums. With the turf growing out of fashion during the 90s, with later studies showing the turf to have harmful effects. As though not entirely proved, artificial turf has been linked to the deaths of 6 Phillies who played on the turf at Veterans Stadium in the late 70s and early 80s. And past the turf in the first season, there was another later issue they never thought would be an issue, which was the height of the roof, which was thought to be high enough to avoid being hit by baseballs. But that theory was challenged when Mike Schmidt hit a mammoth shot to center in the first inning of a game in 1974, and it would have an overhead speaker attached above a roof truss, and what would otherwise be a no-doubt home run was instead a single, as according to the ground rules, that ball was still in play, marking the first time a speaker had been hit at the Astrodome. Schmidt was naturally frustrated, saying after the game, "I said to myself, that damn speaker cost me a homer. If for some reason late in the season I'm one short of the home run lead, I'll think back about it." But he didn't need to worry, as he would lead the league in home runs at 36 for the first of 8 times in his career. And there's no doubt that it would be a home run, with Cesar Cedeno speculating that it may have hit the flag over the scoreboard. While the head of the math department at the University of Houston actually did the math and estimated that it would have traveled about 500 feet, but instead, it was just a single. A situation still relevant to the stadium the Rays won't be playing in this year, as at Tropicana Field, the catwalk has 4 rings, with a ball that reaches C or D being labeled a home run, while any ball that hits A or B is ruled in play and can be caught. Though the Schmidt situation was always a possibility, something they thought was never a possibility occurred on June 15, 1976. The biggest benefit for having an indoor stadium, aside from lowering the chances of being attacked by swarms of birds, is that there will never be a rainout. But they forgot to consider the possibilities of a rain-in. On that June day, there was torrential downpours in the area, exceeding 12 inches in some locations. Roadways in Houston were flooded, there were numerous road closures, power failures, and 4 people would pass away. And with this, the Astros decided to cancel their game against the Pirates. Though the field was perfectly fine, and the Astrodome suffered no structural damage, fans could have easily been hit by misfortune on the way to the game, which actually happened to the umpires whose cars stalled out in the water, and for their safety, they canceled the game. To accommodate, tables were brought out to the infield, and the 2 teams shared dinner, along with the more than 20 fans who actually did show up. So I guess that marked the first rain-in. And aside from baseball, other sports and events were a major part of the Astrodome's history. The other team who played in the dome at its opening was the Houston Cougars, and 3 years later, they would play in one of the most important games in college and even basketball history. The second-ranked Houston Cougars took on the number 1 ranked UCLA Bruins, led by John Wooden and Lou Alcindor, of course later changing his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The game was dubbed the Game of the Century, with 52,693 in attendance, which was a single-game record for college basketball for 35 years. And more than that, It was the first nationally televised college basketball game. Not even broadcasted on a major network, it still attracted over 12 million viewers. And Houston would go on to beat UCLA 71-69, which snapped a 47-game win streak. And what the game proved was the commercial opportunity of college basketball and college sports in general, with college tournament games shifting to bigger indoor stadiums in the future, including just 3 years later in 1971, when the Astrodome hosted the Final Four, where UCLA beat Villanova in the finals in front of 31,000. The Final Four not being played in a traditional basketball arena since 1996, and really starting with that game at the Astrodome. The Cougars would play there until 1997, along with Texas Southern and the Houston Rockets at one point. And the other sport most associated with the Dome was football. It was expected that professional football would be played there right away, but it wouldn't be until 1968, when the Houston Oilers began playing the Astrodome after feuds between Bud Adams and Hofheinz over lease terms, becoming the first professional team to play football in a dome stadium, joining the NFL after the merger in 1970. And the first few years before that, there was football for the University of Houston. The first game taking place in 1965 between Tulsa and Houston, with most of the focus from journalists on how odd it was for football to be played in a dome stadium, saying it felt artificial like the grass and overall bland, but people got used to it and missed out on all the possible snow games in Houston. And the Oilers would not get a lot of respect when they began playing the Astrodome. That is until they drafted Earl Campbell in 1978. 4 years after the Dome missed out on a chance to host the Super Bowl, with Hofheinz's health issues hindering his negotiation skills, the game was instead played at Rice Stadium. The first time it was hosted at a stadium where an NFL team didn't play, but with the addition of the running back from Texas, the Oilers became contenders. He became the first running back to score 4 touchdowns while playing on Monday Night Football in his rookie season, and he helped the Oilers make it all the way to the AFC Championship, where they would lose to the Steelers. And in 1980, it would be the same result. But after that defeat, they were greeted by 60,000 supporters when they came back home, with Coach Bum Phillips promising to get over the hump the next year. But they would lose in the wildcard game the next year, and it wouldn't be until 1988 when they made the playoffs again. And during that year, Bud Adams made it known he was not happy with the state of the Astrodome, which in part led to the $67 million worth of renovations, removing that famous scoreboard that would add an additional 10,000 seats, putting in a new scoreboard along with 4 exterior ramp towers and an additional 66 luxury suites. Renovations that were mainly made for the team to stay for at least another decade. But after still not getting to that final step with Moon as quarterback, including blowing a 35-3 lead to Buffalo in the playoffs in '93, enthusiasm declined after a disappointing 1995 season. And though Adams' contract with the Astrodome ran through 1997, Adams decided to move the team to Tennessee, making the decision early with approval from the NFL, while they played small crowds in 1996 with their status as a lame duck franchise, eventually becoming the Titans, while the Texans became a franchise in 2002. With an indoor stadium and a retractable roof built right next to the Astrodome. Regardless of the final outcome, the 80s were the best of times for the Houston teams that played there, despite the Astrodome losing some of its appeal nationwide, as dome stadiums with excessive features became normal, seen with the 1986 All-Star Game having less hype than the All-Star Game in 1968. As someone who was in the league during both of those, but didn't get to play, was Nolan Ryan. After a few years on the Mets and 8 seasons with the Angels, Ryan returned to his home state in 1980. Becoming the first athlete to make over $1 million a year. And for the first time since the Dome opened, attendance was over 2 million. And aside from Ryan being there, the Astros were contenders for the first time. As for the first time, they were in the playoffs, winning a tiebreaker game over the Dodgers to win the West. And they were set up for an NLCS matchup against the Phillies. And fans were excited, but none more than the proclaimed #1 fan, Astroman, who announced that he would live on top of the Astrodome until the Astros won the World Series. And Denver Griffith actually did that, living inside a 6-man tent with a telephone line down to the radio station where he gave interviews, only getting food and drinks by lowering a rope with a basket. At one point, his mother had to interrupt Oilers practice to ensure her son got food, and he would be up there for 10 days. And over that time, the Astros and Phillies played a great 5-game series, with the Astros winning the first playoff game at the Dome in Game 3, but they dropped the next 2, losing Game 5 in extra innings to the eventual World Series champions. Astroman came down, and if he were to actually stay up there until the Astros won the World Series, then he would be up there for another 37 years, scarring fans when a skeleton fell onto the field in LA. They made the playoffs again the next year in a shortened season, winning the first 2 games at home in the NLDS, but losing the final 3 to the Dodgers. And they wouldn't be in the playoffs again until 1986. And that was a big year for the Astros all around. They hosted the All-Star Game as mentioned, and they won 96 games that year, which was a franchise record. And they faced a team that also had a franchise record in wins at 108 in the Mets. And after they won a 12-inning Game 5, the Mets were up 3-2 going back to Houston, where the two played one of the best games of all time. The Astros scored 3 in the first inning, but they wouldn't again until the 14th, and the Mets would not score for the first 8 innings. but a 3-run rally ending with a Ray Knight sac fly sent things extras. The Mets scored first in extras in the 14th, but a Billy Hatcher home run tied things in the bottom half, and after a scoreless 15th, the Mets would score 3 in the 16th, but the Astros rallied for 2 in the bottom half. Then with 2 on and 2 outs on a full count, Jesse Orosco struck out Kevin Bass to win the series. With the Cy Young winner Mike Scott ready to pitch Game 7, the loss was devastating, as the Mets would go on to win the World Series, with all 3 teams who beat the Astros in the playoffs in the 80s going on to win the World Series. And it would be over a decade until the Astros were competitive again, as Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell led the team as the Oilers moved out. They made the playoffs 3 years in a row to end the 90s, but each time they would lose, losing in 3 in 97, then 4 the next 2 years. And within their rebranding in the early 90s to appear as a more serious team, there were also calls to leave. When the Astrodome was renovated, mainly for the Oilers, the Astros grew disenchanted with the dome, and as attendance declined during the 1991 offseason, Astros management announced they intended to move to Washington, D.C., but it was not approved by National League owners. The team was then sold to Drayden McClain, who intended on keeping the Astros in Houston, and with the success and increased attendance in the late 90s, there was more hope, but the Astros still had problems with the Astrodome, and still with the city itself. The team was sold to William Collins, who intended on moving them to D.C., but Collins had difficulty finding a site for a stadium, and was forced to give Houston a chance. And having already lost the Oilers, voters in Houston responded positively, and the Astros would stay put. And they would move into a new stadium with a retractable roof, a locomotive that moves across the outfield after home runs, and a f***ing hill in center field. And the name of this new stadium, Enron Field. Right up there with FTX Arena and arena names that did not age well. That would be changed to Minute Maid Park, and now is being changed to Daikin Park. And with both of the main teams gone, including the team that the dome's named after, the attraction now was entertainment, which had always been there, with the first concert by Judy Garland in 1965, to Elvis's 6 shows in 1974, to the 80,000 who saw the Jacksons in 1984, along with numerous events such as political conventions, rodeos, WWE, and boxing matches, including Muhammad Ali, who fought Cleveland Williams in 1966, and possibly the most famous event to occur here in the Battle of the Sexes between Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King, which attracted 90 million viewers worldwide. The Astrodome would remain an entertainment venue for years, but with the new stadium right next door, the Astrodome became expendable. 3 years after being used as a shelter for victims of Hurricane Katrina, the facility was cited for numerous code violations and considered non-compliant, with only maintenance workers and security guards being allowed to enter the building. There were ideas to turn the dome into a luxury hotel or a production studio, but both would be rejected. In 2013, a comprehensive plan that would cost $213 million to renovate the stadium was introduced, converting the dome into a state-of-the-art convention center and exhibition known as the New Dome Experience. But it was struck down in a vote by Houston voters, and 1 month after that vote, part of the dome was demolished, which had been planned before the vote, tearing down 3 exterior pedestrian ramp towers, disconnecting ramp bridges from the main structure, and removing the ticket booths and the interior seats. And what kept the dome from complete demolition was it being added to the National Trust for Historic Preservation's list of the 11 most endangered historic structures, being added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2014, which left the dome in an odd state, adding complexities for political attempts to bring the dome down while allowing for private investments aimed at preservation. But the size and scope of such a preservation has been a deterrent to achieving funding, with more attempts never coming to fruition as the dome is still unused and considered abandoned. But the reason it's still standing, with the efforts to keep it standing, is because of the history behind it. A stadium ahead of its time, for better or worse, it ushered in new possibilities for sports-related construction throughout the world. It left people in awe with its size, excess, and technology. The modern-day example can be seen with the Sphere in Vegas, with some also calling that the 8th wonder of the world. But the Astrodome, in a sense, paved the way for the Sphere. Built on excess and the new ideology of consumerism, the Astrodome was America's first real version of their own Coliseum. More than a stadium, it was a symbol of excess and prosperity where people could go to watch a murder. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.